"You're not my real family. You don't belong here." Those were the words my daughter, the bride, said to me at her own wedding. I was the ghost at the feast, a carpenter in a cheap suit, clutching a small wooden box I had carved for her. Her mother had just delivered a moving speech about being a heroic single mom, conveniently forgetting the 20 years of my life I had sacrificed, the second jobs, and the final $20,000 check I'd written to fund this fairy tale. They expected me to sit in the back row and quietly disappear. They had crafted the perfect story with me as the villain, the failure she had risen above. But you'll never guess what a man with nothing left to lose will do when someone leaves a live microphone on the stage. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. The 5 a.m. alarm was a piercing electronic shriek that tore through my dream and threw me into the cold light of day. Today was Jessica's wedding day. The little angel who once perched on my shoulders was gone. In her place was a woman I didn't know, about to step into a world where I didn't belong. I walked through the silent house, a museum of memories. My fingers traced the last height mark on the doorframe, from when she was 14, just before her mother's world swallowed her whole. In the bedroom, my suit was waiting, a foreign object in a closet filled with work clothes. I'd bought it at a discount store. Dressed, I looked at the tired man in the mirror and saw an actor preparing for a role he never auditioned for. Father of the bride. Before leaving, I made one last stop at my woodshop, my only kingdom. The familiar scent of pine resin and linseed oil was a comforting embrace. On the workbench sat the wedding gift, a pair of tiny maple ballet slippers nestled in a walnut box. I had to put the finishing touches on it, not for the box, but for myself. I needed the steady, familiar work to quiet my soul. As I used my smallest chisel to carve the delicate bow on the toe of a slipper, a memory flooded back. Jessica, 5 years old, shyly hiding behind my leg at the door of her first ballet class. She was terrified, and Sarah, her mother, was losing patience. I knelt down and whispered in her ear, "If you're brave enough to go in there today, I'll make you a special gift tonight, just for the bravest dancer in the world." That night, I stayed up until dawn, carving the first pair of wooden slippers, a promise, a symbol of courage. Love, I learned then, was sometimes just a sleepless night and a block of maple wood. It was finished. The box sat on the bench, a perfect object born from imperfect memories. It held a piece of my life, my entire philosophy, carefully packaged. I would not go to this wedding empty-handed. I would bring my truth. The 3-hour drive to Napa was a journey through the past. I remembered the phone call 3 days ago. A wave of loneliness had compelled me to call Jessica just to hear her voice, but Sarah had answered. "Jessica's in a dress fitting," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The last thing she needs is a distraction." "The $20,000 check, have you sent it yet?" The vendor is asking. "Your job is to send the money on time and show up on time. Don't complicate things." She had redefined my role, not family, but a tardy sponsor. That call had extinguished the last ember of hope and fanned the flame of truth into a steady burn. A vintage Mustang passed me on the highway, and a sharp pain shot through my chest. I remembered our last happy summer, Jessica, 14, singing along to the radio in the passenger seat of my own Mustang. 6 months later, I sold that car, my father's heirloom, for the $35,000 down payment on Sarah's new house. A night janitor, cleaning offices to pay for Jessica's private school tuition. At 3 in the morning, emptying a trash can, I saw a discarded newspaper. On the front page was a picture of Sarah, smiling next to a headline praising her built-from-scratch career. I looked down at my own filthy hands. I was the ghost financing her success story. The day I missed Jessica's piano recital, I wasn't drunk, as Sarah had told her. I was in the emergency room, 2 ribs broken after an accident at a construction site. The moment I woke up, I called Jessica. She gave me no quarter. The hospital? Another lie. She had screamed into the phone, her voice thick with hatred. I don't want to hear your excuses. Don't ever call me again. The endless dial tone of a severed connection hurt more than any physical wound. Sarah hadn't just taken my money, she had turned my daughter's love into a weapon to destroy me. My truck passed through the iron gates of the Davenport estate. The journey through the past was over. I had arrived carrying not just a wedding gift, but the weight of 20 years of sacrifice, humiliation, and heartbreak. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. I was no longer a father seeking acceptance. I was a man with nothing left to lose. My truck, an old, tired workhorse, looked obscene parked among a glittering flock of Mercedes, Porsches, and Teslas. A valet in a crisp, cream-colored uniform approached me with a professional smile, but his eyes held a flicker of confusion, as if I were a delivery man who'd come to the wrong entrance. I'm here for the wedding, I said, feeling the need to explain my own existence. Of course, sir. This way his words were polite, but he made no move to touch the rusted door of my truck. I stepped out, clutching the wooden box like it was my only shield. With every step on the cobblestone path leading to the main hall, I felt myself shrinking. The very air here was different. It didn't smell of sawdust and hard work. It carried the clean, expensive fragrance of lilies and roses, a scent that felt suffocating. The gentle melody of a string quartet drifted from somewhere inside, mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes and the soft laughter of early guests. And then I stepped into the main hall. The sight of it stole my breath. Cold marble floors, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the light of a colossal crystal chandelier that hung from a vaulted ceiling. It was large enough to illuminate my entire neighborhood. Everything was draped in white and cream, from the flowing silk ribbons to the towering floral arrangements. This world was designed to overwhelm, to declare a level of status so far beyond my own I didn't even know its name. My eyes fell on a long, ornate table against the far wall, laden with champagne glasses. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized that table. I'd made it. I remembered a winter 2 years ago, spending 3 sleepless nights in the shop to finish it for one of Sarah's important clients. Sarah had complained about the design of the legs, about the sheen of the varnish. She wanted it perfect, and I had made it perfect. Now it stood there, a piece of my sweat and soul, and on it a small brass plaque read, "Designed by Sarah Miller." It wasn't my work anymore. It was her trophy, a testament to her talent. I felt as if I had been robbed of a piece of my soul in the middle of a crowded room. I retreated, finding a spot behind a massive marble column, hoping to become invisible. I didn't have the strength for another forced, awkward conversation. From here, I could watch without being seen. I saw women in silk dresses, jewels glittering at their necks and wrists. Men in perfectly tailored suits, shaking hands and talking about the stock market. They moved with an easy confidence, the assurance of people who knew they belonged. And then I heard the whisper from 2 women standing nearby. "Look," one of them said, nodding in my direction. "Is that the biological father?" "That's him," the other replied, her voice low but carrying clearly. "John Miller. Sarah told me about him. An alcoholic carpenter. A shame the bride had to invite her failure of a father on her special day. Just for appearances, I'm sure." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. The sounds around me faded to a dull roar. The music, the laughter, all of it disappeared. All that remained were those words echoing in the hollow space inside me. So this was my role. This was the story Sarah had woven, and everyone here had already learned their lines. I wasn't just an unwanted guest. I was a prop in their narrative. My presence, in my cheap suit and with my calloused hands, was the perfect backdrop to highlight the brilliant success of Sarah and Jessica. I was the darkness meant to enhance their light. The humiliation had begun before my daughter had even said a word to me. It was silent, creeping through the glances, the whispers, the very atmosphere of the place. I stood there, hidden behind that cold marble column, and for the first time that day, I felt something other than sorrow and loneliness. It was rage, a cold, profound rage, beginning to stir in the deepest part of my soul. They wanted a failure? They wanted a drama? Fine, I wouldn't disappoint them. The gentle plucking of a harp began, a signal that the ceremony was about to start. Guests settled into the white chairs arranged neatly on the manicured lawn. Before them stood a magnificent floral arch of thousands of white roses and peonies, framing a view of endless vineyards under the golden afternoon sun. The scene was perfect, like a postcard from another world, a world without sawdust and grease stains. I found my seat in the last row, partially hidden by a large potted plant. From here, I was just a shadow, an anonymous observer. It was for the best. It allowed me to see everything without being seen. And then Jessica appeared. She was on the arm of a man I assumed was her stepfather, Sarah's stockbroker husband. She walked down the aisle, scattered with rose petals, and for a moment all the complicated emotions inside me vanished, replaced by pure awe. She was beautiful. Not the beauty of a young girl, but the brilliant, polished beauty of a woman who had achieved everything she ever wanted. But as she drew closer to the altar, as I could see her face more clearly, I noticed something. Her smile, though radiant, was tight at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes scanned the crowd, but didn't seem to truly see anyone. She was like an actress who had her part memorized. She stood beside Richard, the groom. He was handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He took her hand, and as they turned to face the officiant, I got a better look at him. And that's when a cold sense of unease began to creep into my bones. Richard's smile never reached his eyes. It was a politician's smile, practiced in a mirror, designed to reassure and impress. When he spoke his vows, his voice was smooth and even, without a tremor of emotion. He spoke of respect, support, and building a future together. It sounded less like a declaration of love and more like he was reading the terms of a contract. Then I looked at the Davenport family in the front row. Mr. and Mrs. Davenport weren't watching their son with tears of pride in their eyes. They were surveying the crowd. Mr. Davenport gave a subtle nod to an important guest in the third row. Mrs. Davenport was assessing another woman's dress. For them, this was not a sacred family moment. This was a power play, a perfectly orchestrated business merger. They weren't welcoming a new daughter-in-law. They were acquiring a beautiful and suitable asset, an addition to the Davenport portfolio. And suddenly, the rage inside me cooled, replaced by something far more terrifying: fear. I was afraid for Jessica. She had fought her whole life to escape my mediocre world, to enter this glittering one. But maybe she was just trading one cage for another, a prettier, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. In this world, was love a currency? Was happiness measured in net worth? I had financed her escape, but perhaps I had unwittingly pushed her into a prison far more sophisticated and cold. The ceremony ended with thunderous applause. Everyone moved to the reception hall. I found my seat again at a table in the back, the table of misfits, and watched in silence. After the appetizers, the master of ceremonies took the stage and introduced the mother of the bride. Sarah ascended, graceful in a seafoam green silk dress, looking more like an actress accepting an Oscar than a mother. She took the microphone, dabbing the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, though I knew for a fact there wasn't a single tear there. "Hello, everyone," she began, her voice perfectly tremulous. "My heart is so full of emotions right now, words can hardly describe it." She paused, letting the silence build the drama. "First, I want to extend my deepest, most sincere thanks to the Davenport family, to Thomas and Catherine," she said, beaming at Jessica's new in-laws. "Thank you for welcoming my daughter Jessica into your wonderful family with such open arms and kind hearts. Seeing the love you have for her, I know my little girl has found a second home. Looking at my daughter here today," she turned to Jessica, her eyes glistening, "so beautiful, so intelligent, and so strong, I'm reminded of the long journey the two of us have walked together. A journey that wasn't always easy." She paused again, taking a deep, shuddering breath to rein in her emotions. The room was silent, hanging on her every word. "Many of you know I raised Jessica on my own," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "There were times of incredible hardship. There were nights I lay awake, worrying about bills, worrying about her future. There were times I felt the whole world was against me, and I had only my own two shoulders to carry it all. But then," she smiled through an imaginary tear, "I would look at Jessica's angelic face, and I knew I had to be strong. For her. She was always my inspiration," Sarah continued, her voice swelling with pride. "And I made a promise to myself that I would sacrifice everything, that I would work tirelessly to ensure she would never want for anything, that she would have the very best opportunities life could offer. I may not have been able to give her a complete family, but I gave her all the love and strength of a mother, a father, and a friend." The rage inside me began to burn again, hot and fierce. How dare she say those words? How dare she twist my checks, my nights cleaning toilets, my sweat and blood into her own heroic narrative? Her speech was reaching its crescendo. She raised her glass, looking directly at Jessica, her eyes now truly shimmering, but with the tears of a triumphant conqueror. "Jessica, my love, seeing you stand here today, so beautiful and happy beside Richard, I know that every tear, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it was all worth it. I did it all by myself, and I would do it all again for you. I love you more than anything in this world." The applause was deafening, a standing ovation. They were cheering for the heroic single mother, the icon of sacrifice and unconditional love. I sat frozen in the storm of sound. The fear for Jessica was gone. The hesitation had vanished. Sarah's speech wasn't just a lie, it was an act of erasure. She had rewritten history, scrubbed my name from every page, and cast herself as the sole protagonist. She had built her daughter's castle of happiness on a foundation that was completely rotten. And I knew. I couldn't let Jessica live her entire life inside that lie. As cruel as it might be, she deserved the truth. That foundation had to be destroyed, even if it meant the entire castle would come crashing down with it. The applause finally died down. Sarah, basking in her glory, returned to her seat. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my linen napkin on the table. The decision was made. It was time for an unscheduled performance. After Sarah's speech, the applause was thunderous. Everyone was on their feet, celebrating the heroic mother, the woman who had done it all on her own. I remained seated, the sound washing over me like a taunt. Then the MC stepped out again. "And now," he said with a beaming smile, "let's hear from our beautiful bride, Mrs. Jessica Davenport." Jessica glided to the microphone, an angelic vision. She accepted the adoration, thanked her mother again with a dramatic embrace, and then launched into her prepared speech, thanking her new family, thanking her friends. Every word was polished, perfect. And then she did the thing that pushed me over the edge. Her gaze swept across the room, and for the first time that evening, it landed on me. There was no love in that look, no recognition, not even pity. It was as cold and distant as the eyes of a stranger. "There are also a few people here today, out of politeness," she said, her voice lilting with a condescending air. "Like Mr. John Miller, for instance, the man who had the biological honor of creating me. But family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about presence. It's about love. And today, on the happiest day of my life, surrounded by my real family." She paused, a perfectly calculated beat to let the weight of her words sink in. "I realize you don't belong here." That was it. The final gavel. The sentence had been passed. I wasn't just invisible. I was an intruder, something to be disposed of. It was over. More than over. 20 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing bitterness, of silent sacrifice. It all shattered in that one moment. The 30 meters to the stage felt like the longest walk of my life. I moved through a sea of eyes that shifted from curiosity to contempt. I walked past the two women who had called me a failure of a father and met their gaze. I passed the Davenport table where Mr. Davenport was watching me like an unforeseen variable in a business equation. Every eye was on me, but there was no turning back. Her eyes widened, a silent warning. "Don't, John. Don't you dare." Jessica, my daughter, just looked annoyed. She didn't understand yet. She thought I was drunk, that I was about to make a scene, to beg for pity. She was still looking down on me, both literally and figuratively. And Richard, the groom, simply stood there with a faint, amused smile on his lips. To him, this was just an interesting disruption, a bit of unexpected drama in a perfectly planned day. A strange power surged through me. It was the power of a man who has had everything taken from him, and therefore has nothing left to fear. 20 years of silence, 20 years of being dismissed, 20 years of being a ghost. It ends here, right now. I put one foot on the first step, then the other. A second microphone stood on its stand, forgotten after Sarah's speech. It was waiting for me. The entire room held its breath, and I stepped onto the stage. I took the microphone from its stand. The cold metal was a solid, real thing in my palm. A soft screech echoed from the speakers as I brought it to my lips, the sound like a bell tolling the start of an unexpected play. The room was utterly silent. "Sorry to interrupt," I began, my voice booming through the hall, steadier than I could have imagined. "I just wanted to say a few words." I heard Sarah's speech and my daughter's speech. They're beautiful stories, but it seems they're missing a few chapters. Allow me, as someone who was there, to help you fill in the blanks." I turned to Sarah, who stared at me in horror, as if I were a ghost risen from the grave. "Let's start with your admirable career, Sarah. Sarah Designs, a testament to the rise of a single mother. You have a talent for design, no one can deny that, but a beautiful drawing can't turn itself into a table. So, who was it that turned your ideas into reality?" I paused, scanning the room before looking directly at her again. "Who stayed up all night in the woodshop, turning lifeless lumber into the exquisite furniture you built your reputation on? Who managed the crew, fixed every mistake, worked weekends for no pay? I placed a hand on my own chest. I did. And now, let's talk about money. Let's talk about the foundation of this empire you built. I turned to Jessica, whose face was a mask of confusion and anger. That first house your mother bought after we divorced, the one that was for your future, did she ever tell you where the down payment came from? It came from selling the 1967 Ford Mustang your grandfather left me. $35,000. Every penny of it I gave to her. Instantly, Sarah exploded. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. "He's lying!" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched with panic. "He's drunk! Security! Get this drunk out of here!" Two large security guards in black suits at the back of the room started to move. But then, a deep, powerful voice cut through the chaos. "Hold on!" All heads turned. It was Mr. Davenport, the father of the groom. He rose slowly to his feet. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Sarah with eyes as cold as blue ice. "I want to hear the rest of the story," he said, his tone devoid of emotion, but carrying an authority that was absolute. Sarah froze, her face pale. The power she had so desperately tried to align herself with had just turned against her. I had an unexpected ally, not out of kindness, but out of the cold calculation of a businessman protecting his investment. I gave Mr. Davenport a solemn nod of thanks and continued, "Thank you, sir." As I was saying, the foundation was built with a Mustang, but a house needs more than that. I looked back at Jessica. "Your tuition at Crestwood Private School, the trips to Europe, the designer clothes. Did you ever wonder how a brand-new design firm could afford all of that?" "It came from my second job. A job your mother knew about, but told you a different story. From 10 at night until 4 in the morning, after a full day in the woodshop, I worked as a janitor. I cleaned the offices of people just like the Davenports here," I said, nodding toward the powerful family, "so that my daughter could have a chance to sit at the same table as their children." But no one was more stunned than Jessica. She took a step back, her hands flying to her mouth as tears began to stream down her face. "No!" she sobbed, her voice breaking. "No!" "You're lying," Mom said. "Mom said you gambled all our savings away." That accusation, so innocent and so cruel, was the final knife in my heart. Sarah hadn't just erased me. She had painted a monster in my place. The pain in my chest was sharper than the day my ribs had broken. I took a small step closer to her. I wasn't angry, just filled with a bottomless sorrow. "Gambled?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I slowly held out my hands in front of her, under the stage lights. "Look at these hands, Jessie." My hands. They were not the hands of a gambler. They were a map of a life of labor. The skin was thick and rough, covered in calluses from hammers and planers. There were fine white scars, memories of a slipped saw blade or a stray chisel. My fingernails could never be perfectly clean. There was always a line of grease or wood dust ingrained deep within them. "Do these hands look like they know how to hold a deck of cards, or do they only know how to hold a hammer and a mop?" "You look for yourself. These are the hands that paid your tuition. These are the hands that built the world you're standing in." Jessica stared at my hands, and her whole body began to tremble. For the first time, I saw real doubt in her eyes. The wall of lies Sarah had built around her for 20 years was beginning to crack. She looked from my hands to my face, then to her mother, who stood there, silent and shaking. A hush fell over the room. They were no longer looking at me like a drunk. They were looking at me like a man who had just ripped open a terrible secret. I knew I had broken through the first line of defense, but the battle wasn't over. "But the money," I said, my voice dropping low, pulling everyone's attention back to me. The money wasn't the worst thing your mother took from me. Not even close. I looked directly into Jessica's eyes, and I knew the next blow would cut far, far deeper. The silence in the hall was heavy, suffocating. Jessica stood frozen, staring at my calloused hands as if seeing them for the first time. But I knew that to completely demolish the wall of lies Sarah had built, I needed more than stories about money. I had to strike at the heart of the lie itself. "But the money," I said, my voice dropping low, pulling everyone's attention back to me. "Money can be earned again. Work can be done. But some things, once they're lost, you can never get back. Let's talk about this wedding. This fairy tale wedding your mother worked so hard to prepare." I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up, displaying the last email Sarah had sent me. I didn't just hold it up. That was too weak, too distant. I stepped down from the stage. Once again, I moved between the tables, but this time no one dared to whisper. They just watched in silence. I walked directly to the Davenport table where the most powerful people in the room sat. Mr. Davenport watched me, his gaze sharp, expectant. I placed the phone down on the pristine white linen right in front of him. The screen was still bright. "Please have a look," I said, my voice clear. An email with the subject line, "Final Wedding Cost Payment." The amount is $20,000, sent from the official company email of Sarah Designs. She claimed that without this money, the Davenports would look down on my daughter. She used your family's honor to leverage the last of my savings. Mr. Davenport didn't need his reading glasses. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the email. His already stern face hardened into granite. He said nothing, but the slight clenching of his jaw was more terrifying than any shout. Now the groom, Richard, could finally stay silent no longer. He shot to his feet, his handsome face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry at the loss of control. "Sir," he said, his voice straining to remain polite, "this is highly inappropriate. This is my wedding. Whatever this is can be settled later." I turned and looked him straight in the eye. A young man, accustomed to a world of order and established rules, and I was the one breaking all of them. "Young man," I replied, my tone firm but not yelling, "you are about to marry a woman whose life was built on my back. You are about to join families with a woman who has deceived both you and me. You have a right to know what you're marrying into." The words were like a slap to Richard's face. He was stunned into silence. Because I wasn't talking about love or morality. I was speaking his language, the language of value, of truth, and of risk in a transaction. I walked back to the stage, leaving my phone on the Davenport table like a ticking time bomb. It was time for the final blow. I looked directly at Jessica, who was sobbing now, her beautiful face a wreck of tears and confusion. "But even those lies," I said, my voice finally beginning to tremble, not from weakness, but from the pain of years of suppression finally breaking free, "are not as cruel as the lie that stole you from me. Jessie, do you remember your piano recital when you were 16? The mention of it jolted Sarah from her stupor. She knew this was the kill shot. "That's enough, John," she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. "What are you doing? Stop torturing her. She doesn't deserve this on her wedding day." She was trying to play the protective mother again, to cast me as the villain. "Mom, be quiet." The voice was weak but clear. It wasn't mine. It was Jessica's. She lifted her head, tears streaming, but her eyes, for the first time, held a new emotion as she looked at her mother. Rebellion. "Be quiet," she repeated, louder this time. "I want to hear." That was the moment everything crumbled for Sarah. For the first time in her life, her daughter wasn't on her side. For the first time, she chose to hear the truth, no matter how painful. The fortress Sarah had built for 20 years was being torn down from the inside by the very person it was meant to protect. Sarah stumbled back as if she'd been struck by lightning. She was utterly defeated. Now I was speaking only to Jessica. The rest of the world had ceased to exist. "Thank you," I said softly. I took a deep breath, gathering all my strength to tell the most painful story of all. That day, I promised I would be there. I bought a huge bouquet of roses. I turned down a job so I could be there. But I never showed up, I said, looking her right in the eye. Your mother told you I was drunk, that I chose a bar over you, and you believed her. You called me, you screamed that you hated me. The truth, Jessie, is that on that day, I was lying in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital. A scaffold at a construction site had collapsed. A steel beam fell on me, broke 2 of my ribs, and punctured my lung. The first thing I did when I woke up was call your mother. I begged her to tell you the truth, begged her to tell you I was sorry, that I loved you and was so proud of you. I paused, a lump forming in my throat. But she didn't. She saw an opportunity, a perfect chance to erase me from your life forever. She turned my accident into her weapon. She let you live with that hatred while I lay in a hospital bed, hurting not from my broken bones, but from the thought that I had broken your heart. The final truth was out. It hung in the air, naked and terrible. Jessica wasn't crying anymore. She just stood there, motionless as a statue, her face a bloodless white. Her eyes were wide, staring into nothing, as if the world she had always known had just shattered into a million pieces before her. A single word escaped her lips, not a denial, but the whisper of a soul that had been utterly broken. No. I didn't take the main path back. I cut through the service area, past the chefs and staff on their smoke break. They glanced at me with curious eyes, but didn't dare ask. I just wanted to get to my truck, to my familiar world of steel and oil, and drive away from this place of silk and lies forever. The afternoon air was starting to cool. The music and chaos of the reception hall had faded to a distant, muffled hum. The white gravel crunched under my boots, each step feeling like it was grinding the remains of a family into dust. I was almost at my truck. It stood there, humble and loyal, an island of truth in an ocean of artifice. "Mr. Miller." The voice came from behind me, cold and precise. I turned. It was Richard, the groom. He had followed me. He stood a few yards away, his tuxedo still impeccable, but the polite smile was gone from his face. It was as blank and unreadable as a marble statue. "What is it?" I asked, my voice weary. I had no fight left in me. He took a few more steps until we were only an arm's length apart. He looked me directly in the eye, the look of a businessman assessing a flawed contract. "Everything you just said," he began, his tone flat, devoid of anger or sadness. "What percentage of it was true?" It was such a cold question. Not, "Is it true?" but "What percentage?" He was quantifying the deceit, calculating the extent of the damages. I looked right back into his eyes, the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. 100%, I answered. "Every last word. You can check the bank transfers if you want. My name is on every tuition check, on every invoice for Sarah's company repairs. The truth has a paper trail, young man." Richard didn't look surprised or shocked. He was just silent for a moment, processing. His eyes did one last scan of my face, as if to confirm something. Then he gave a single, sharp, cold nod. He said nothing else. Not a word of sympathy, not a word of condemnation. He simply turned and walked away, back toward his ruined party. I stood there, watching him go. I knew what that nod meant. In his world, a marriage was an investment, and he had just discovered he'd invested in an asset built on a foundation of absolute fraud. The marriage was dead, before the wedding night had even begun. I got home late. I didn't change, didn't eat. I just sat in the old armchair in the living room, surrounded by darkness and silence. There was no sense of victory, no satisfaction, just a vast, hollow emptiness. I had detonated a nuclear bomb, and now I was sitting in the wasteland I had created. The next morning, my phone was a constant buzz. But then it rang again, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice gruff. "Excuse me, is this John Miller?" A calm, familiar male voice asked. "This is David Chen, the architect." We worked together a few times through Sarah's company. I remembered him, a decent professional man. "Yes, this is him," I replied, a little wary. "John, I'll get straight to the point," David said. "I was at the wedding yesterday. I'm a friend of a relative of the Davenports. I heard everything." I braced myself for the judgment. "And I wanted to say," he continued, "I'm not surprised. I always wondered. Sarah has a good eye, but the work, the pieces themselves, they had a soul, a sturdiness that I knew didn't come from a drawing. I always knew you were the one who actually built them." Those words, that simple validation from an outsider, meant more than anything. "John, I don't know what your plans are," David said, "but if you're thinking of going into business for yourself, give me a call. I have a few projects that need a real craftsman, not just a talker. Think about it." He hung up. I sat there, stunned. In the ashes of yesterday, a tiny green shoot had just broken through. An offer, a recognition, a new path. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe it was a beginning. 3 days passed in a strange silence. The outside world was still screaming, but I'd turned my phone off. I spent the time in my shop, cleaning, organizing, finding peace in the familiar rhythm of manual work. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, there was a knock on the door. Not the quick rap of a delivery person, but a soft, hesitant knock. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. I opened the door. It was Jessica. She looked wrecked. Her beautiful face was pale, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, just a baggy sweater and jeans. The aura of the princess was gone. Before me stood a broken young woman. We just looked at each other in silence for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice raw. "You ruined everything," she said. It wasn't a scream, but a tired accusation. "My life, my future, all of it. How could you do that to me?" I looked into her eyes, a deep sorrow welling up inside me. "I didn't ruin your life, Jessie," I said gently. "I just turned on the lights." The wreckage was already there, just sitting in the dark. The metaphor seemed to land. She didn't argue. She just started to cry, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "Then believe the truth," I said. I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." It was a long afternoon. For the first time in nearly 20 years, we truly talked. I told her everything. I showed her the old folders of receipts, the yellowed tuition payment slips. I told her about the cold nights in the office buildings, about the pain and the shame. I told her about the phone call from the hospital. She just listened, never interrupting. She listened like someone trying to piece together the fragments of a shattered world. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she just stared into space. There was no forgiveness that afternoon. The wounds were too deep, the deception too vast. There was only the beginning of a painful understanding. As it got dark, she stood to leave. "The Davenports, they called off the wedding," she said quietly, as if talking about someone else. "Mom, she moved out. I don't know where she went." She had called her mother she. Before she walked out the door, she turned back to me. "The wooden box. I left it in my car." I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the silence. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a heavy sadness, but also with a fragile sliver of hope. A week later, my life was slowly finding its rhythm again. I had called David Chen back. We had a meeting scheduled. A new future was taking shape. I spent most of my time in the workshop, finding my peace in the smell of pine and the steady hum of the planer. One afternoon, as I was sanding a tabletop, the same hesitant knock came at the door. I opened it. It was Jessica again. This time, she wasn't crying. Her eyes were still sad, but there was a new clarity in them. In her hands, she held the walnut box I had made. She said nothing, just held the box out to me. I took it. We stood there in silence. I didn't know what to say. Neither did she. Then her gaze drifted past my shoulder into the workshop, where the late afternoon sun was filtering through the sawdust, creating shimmering shafts of light. A place she hadn't set foot in for years. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." Maybe the words were too big, too difficult right now. Instead, she asked a simple question, a question that meant more than any apology could. "Dad," she began, her voice still hesitant, Can you teach me how to make something?" I looked up at my daughter, a young woman who had lost her gilded world and was now standing on the threshold of a different one, a world of truth, of labor, of creating something real with her own two hands. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I saw the 5-year-old girl who used to watch me work in wonder. I said nothing. I just nodded. I stepped back and opened the workshop door wider, inviting her in. But as Jessica crossed the threshold into my workshop, holding that wooden box in her hands, I knew one thing. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking for money or a perfect life. She was looking for the truth. And in my workshop, the truth was the only thing I had to give. It was a start. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. If you've ever been through a similar situation or have any thoughts on this story, please share them in the comments so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.